Hello everyone, welcome to Homeschool. And today we are with metals and non-metals chapters revision. Okay, we are going to revise each and every concept that comes under a chapter quickly. Let us go for the first and foremost, physical properties. And we all very well know that the entire elements which were placed in the periodic table has been classified into metals and non-metals. So it has classified into metals and non-metals based on physical properties and chemical properties of the elements. Scientists have studied physical properties as well as chemical reactions of all the elements, and based on that they said this element is a metal and those elements are non-metals. Okay, so usually the elements which are coming in group number 1 to group number 12 all are categorized as metals, and group number 13 to group number 18 elements are called as non-metals. But in between there are some elements called metalloids also, where they have the properties of both metals as well as non-metals in them. Okay, so based on the physical and chemical properties of various elements, scientists have classified the elements into metals and non-metals, and now we are learning the physical properties of metals and non-metals. Okay, so let us quickly revise them. And we all know that metals are most of the metals are solids only. Not most of them, all are solids only except one element, that is mercury. Okay, so mercury is a liquid. Except this, all elements are solids, all metals are solids. And coming to the non-metals, they can exist either as solids or gases. They have a property called malleability. So what do you mean by malleability? Making an element into thin sheets. So in the market, copper sheets are available, iron sheets are available, aluminium sheets are available. So you can beat a metal into thin sheets. Such a property is called malleability. Metals have that malleability property. And coming to the non-metals, they are not malleable. You can't make them into thin sheets. Say carbon is there, available as solid. Sulfur, available as powder. Can you make them into thin sheets? Never, right? Next property, they are ductile. Who are ductile? Metals are ductile. So what do you mean by ductility? Making a metal into thin wires. Copper wires are available in a market, isn't it? And you know, gold is the most ductile element present in our nature. From 1 gram of gold, you know, you can make a thin wire of length 2 kilometers. So you can just imagine how ductile our gold is. Remember this, gold is the most ductile element present in our nature. After gold comes silver. Okay, and non-metals are not ductile, and you must know the meanings of malleable and ductile here, that is important. Okay, next, metals are good conductors of electricity because they have free electrons. So these free electrons will conduct electricity from one place to another place, whereas non-metals are bad conductors of electricity. And metals have high melting point because they are hard. Metals are generally hard. That is the reason they have high melting points. Non-metals, generally they are soft, so they have less melting point. And the nature of non-metals is different and the nature of metals is entirely different. So these guys have high melting point and these non-metals have low melting points. They are sonorous. What do you mean by sonorous? When you hit onto a surface, sound comes. So if such a thing is coming, then we say it as sonorous. Okay, so whenever you hit a metal on some surface, if it is producing a sound, then that is called sonorous. So metals, any metal you take, when you hit on particular surface, sound, it can produce a sound which is audible to a human ear. So such a property is sonorous, whereas non-metals do not have that property. But there are some exceptions. Okay, you must learn the exceptions also. We learned all metals are good conductors of electricity, but there are two metals, lead and mercury, are bad conductors of electricity. They will not conduct electricity. And later I told you all metals have high melting point, but gallium has less melting point. It can even melt on a palm. Okay, such less melting point they will show. They can even melt on a palm. And sodium, potassium are soft. We learned that metals are hard, yes or no, hard solids. But this sodium, potassium or any alkali metals in the sense the elements that are coming in a first group are called alkali metals. So these metals are soft. You can even cut it with a knife. Fine. And let us see the exceptions under non-metals. Iodine is a shiny, they have a luster. Iodine is a lustrous solid. Okay, so one more property, metals are normally lustrous in the sense their surface is shiny in nature, whereas these guys are non-lustrous. Okay, so they have that luster. Iodine is a solid which is having a metallic luster. And coming to the graphite is one of the allotropic form of carbon. Okay, carbon has mainly two allotropic form, diamond and graphite, where in that the graphite can act as a good conductor of electricity because it has free electrons in it. Okay, so these are the exceptions you have to remember under metals as well as non-metals. Now coming to the chemical reactions of metals. Physical properties we studied. Now we will see chemical properties of metals as well as non-metals. First and foremost, let us discuss chemical properties or chemical reactions of metals. Under that, the very first reaction is reaction with air. So whenever a metal, I'll take copper as an example here, whenever it reacts with the air is nothing but oxygen. Reaction with air is nothing but reaction with oxygen only. So what do you get? Metal oxides you will get, and these metal oxides are basic in nature. Remember, whenever metal combines with oxygen, you get metal oxides, and the nature of metal oxides is basic. Okay, and now but there are some elements, Al, on combining with oxygen you will get Al2O3. Al2O3 is not basic, it is called amphoteric in nature. Amphoteric in nature. Okay, amphoteric in the sense it is neither acidic nor basic. So that these guys, these oxides can react with both acid and a base to give salt and water. Okay, so that is one of the very important reaction. Al2O3 can react with acid also, and this guy can react with, base also. When it reacts with an acid, you will get salt AlCl3 plus water. And when it reacts with a base, you will get NaAlO2, sodium aluminate plus water. These reactions are very, very, very important. And amphoteric oxides in the sense the oxides which can react with both acid and a base. See, that is the example reactions are there in front of you. Examples for amphoteric oxide is Al2O3, and you can also have zinc oxide as another example. Fine. And one more thing you should remember here is all elements do not react in the same way with air. Few elements react very, very, very vigorously with air. Which are those elements? Sodium and potassium. When they react with air, they can even catch fire. Their reactions with air is very dangerous. That is the reason they are always kept in kerosene. Okay, very important question. Why sodium and potassium are stored under kerosene? It is because they are highly reactive, so much reactive that they can even catch fire when they are kept open. Okay, and metals like aluminium, lead, they are less reactive towards oxygen. It is because they will have a protective layer called oxide layer in them. Okay, they react with oxygen, no doubt, but they react very slowly because they have a protective layer around them. But the elements like gold, silver and platinum do not ever react with oxygen. They will never react with oxygen because their reactivity is very less. Not only with oxygen, they will not react with any other element so easily. Remember 3 points here. Sodium, potassium like elements react very vigorously with oxygen when they are kept open, so they are always stored in kerosene. 1 point. Second point, metals like aluminium, zinc, lead, etc. do not easily react with oxygen because they have a protective layer around them. And elements like gold, silver, platinum do not react with oxygen at all because they are least reactive. So this much is about reaction with air or oxygen. And our next reaction is reaction with water. So whenever a metal reacts with water, you usually get metal hydroxides. Metal hydroxides plus hydrogen gas. Remember this. Hydrogen gas is liberated whenever metal reacts with water. Okay, say for example, sodium or potassium, they react very vigorously with oxygen. They can even react with the cold water very vigorously, and they will give you the bases like NaOH along with hydrogen. Okay, and the reactions are highly exothermic here. Sodium and potassium, whenever it is dissolved in the water, it gives hydrogen gas along with lots of fire. It is because during a reaction, large amount of heat is released. Okay, heat is getting released, hydrogen is there, definitely you will observe the formation of fire. Okay, so such reactions are very dangerous, usually with sodium and potassium. Whereas with calcium also reacts with cold water only, but the reaction is less dangerous. It can also give you hydroxide, that is calcium hydroxide plus hydrogen, but heat will not be evolved here. Okay, and this is less dangerous reaction compared to the above reaction, that is with sodium or potassium. And here the calcium pieces, unreacted calcium pieces, keeps floating on the surface. It is because hydrogen gas is coming out now, so that gas is bringing unreacted calcium pieces onto a surface. That is the reason calcium floats on a surface. Very important question, application question can be asked on this. Okay, fine. And coming to magnesium. Magnesium can react with only hot water. Okay, it cannot react with cold water. Magnesium requires hot water for its reaction. And coming to iron and aluminium, they can only react with steam. They can't react with cold water. They cannot react with hot water also. They will only react with the steam, giving Fe3O4 oxide plus hydrogen gas. Here Al2O3 plus hydrogen gas. Okay, these reactions are very important. They may ask you, write a reaction of iron with steam or write a reaction of aluminium with steam. Remember, here you are not getting hydroxides, you are getting only oxides. Okay, these guys can only react with the steam. So this is all about reaction of metals with water. And it's a known fact that metals like gold, platinum and silver, since they are less reactive, they will not react with water. Okay, fine. And coming to the next reaction, that is our third reaction, reaction with acids. Okay, so this we have already studied in the second chapter also, but one point is very important. All metals do not react with acids. Okay, only the metals which are placed above hydrogen in the activity series. We all know the activity series. Yes or no? potassium, sodium, magnesium, aluminium, zinc, iron. Later comes, lead, hydrogen, copper, Ag, Au. Whichever elements are placed above hydrogen in the reactivity series, only those guys can react with acids giving hydrogen gas. Okay, so what is the main reaction here? Whenever a metal reacts with an acid, you will get salt plus hydrogen gas. So which metals can give hydrogen gas? Only those metals which are placed above hydrogen in the activity series. Okay, say for example iron is there. Can it react with this particular acid? Definitely, because iron's position is above hydrogen in the activity series. So what are the products you will get? Salt, that is FeCl3 plus hydrogen gas you will get. Zinc, can it react with the acid H2SO4? Definitely, because zinc is placed above hydrogen in the activity series. So what is the product you will get? You will get zinc sulfate plus hydrogen gas. Whereas copper, can it react with HCl? Where is copper? Copper position is below hydrogen. It cannot react with acids. It cannot displace hydrogen from acids. So here you will not have any reaction. Okay, so this is one important aspect that you have to understand. And the next one is HNO3. You used HCl here, you used H2SO4 here. With both of them, definitely you will get salt and hydrogen gas. But HNO3, when you use HNO3, you will not get hydrogen gas. That hydrogen gas will get converted into water. Okay, why? Because HNO3 is the best oxidizing agent. Okay, hydrogen is formed initially, but this particular hydrogen later gets converted into H2O, because HNO3 is the best oxidizing agent. Remember this point, very, very, very important. Okay, so whenever some metal reacts with HNO3, what are the products you will get? You will get salt plus water plus oxides of nitrogen. Oxides of nitrogen. Okay, so concentrated HNO3, when you add to a metal, instead of hydrogen gas, you will get water. Okay, salt is usually produced, but water is formed instead of hydrogen gas. It is because HNO3 is the strong oxidizing agent. Okay, but here you have an exception. Metals like Mg and Mn, can react with dilute HNO3 to give hydrogen gas. Okay, this is an exception. Metals like Mg and Mn, okay, on reacting with dilute HNO3, not concentrated, dilute HNO3, hydrogen gas can be produced. These guys, when they react with HNO3, hydrogen gas can be produced instead of water. Okay, with rest of the elements, when you treat it with HNO3, definitely you will get water instead of hydrogen. Okay, it is because this HNO3 is the strong oxidizing agent. So this is the reaction of, acids with metals. And later you have displacement reactions also, where we studied the displacement reaction in chapter 1 also in a very detailed way. The metal which is more reactive can displace the metal with less reactive, and you get the respective products. Yes or no? So these are the 4 reactions which are very, very important for metals. Reaction with air, reaction with water, reaction with acids, and displacement reactions. And now let us discuss few reactions of non-metals. Not much, only few aspects about non-metals. Okay. Whenever non-metals combine with air or oxygen, you will get non-metallic oxides, and their nature is acidic. Metallic oxides were basic. Non-metallic oxides are acidic. Remember this word. So what example you can give here? Say the non-metal carbon. It can combine with oxygen and it can give you carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is always acidic in nature. And one more point to be remembered is non-metallic oxides. Non-metallic oxides, whenever they dissolve in water, they will give you acids. They will produce acids. Here you will get H2CO3, that is carbonic acid you will get. H2CO3 acid you will get. In a similar way, metallic oxides, say I will take sodium oxide, metallic oxide. When it dissolves in water, you will actually get NaOH. Okay, bases you will get. This point of difference is very important. Non-metallic oxides on dissolving in water, you are getting acids. Metallic oxides on dissolving in water, you are getting bases. Okay, this point of difference is to be noted, guys. Fine. And non-metals do not react with water, non-metals do not react with acids, and non-metals do not show displacement reactions also. So these are the points of difference that you can mention for the question like differentiate between metals and non-metals based on chemical properties. Okay, so where you have to mention these points under non-metals category. Clear? And no much things to discuss about non-metals, only this much if you can remember, that is more than enough. And now let us go for a concept like how metals can combine with non-metals. Okay, so how do metals combine with a non-metal? Can you tell me what type of compounds can be produced here? Whenever metal combines with a non-metal, you will get the formation of ionic compound. Okay. And in our syllabus, we studied, the dot structures. With the help of dot structures, how to show a metal combining with a non-metal, isn't it? So that formation of ionic compound is a very, very important aspect to be learned. Okay, it can be asked for board examination. Say for example, they will ask you, show the formation of NaCl by the transfer of electrons. Okay, so this is what the question they will ask you, where you have to show the steps properly and give the answer. And we all know always metals loses electrons and non-metals gains electrons. Okay, so using that concept, you must able to show in a stepwise pattern. Okay, and let us learn that how to show. First and foremost, you must be knowing how to write the dot structures for the element. It's very easy. Okay, you have to indicate a symbol and you should mention the number of valence electrons present. Say for example, dot structure of Mg. How do you write dot structure of Mg? So Mg is a magnesium, symbol Mg, magnesium symbol Mg. Okay, so how many valence electron this Mg has? To know the valence electrons, you must know the electronic configuration. So if you have any doubt on electronic configuration, please go to the video that I separately made on electronic configuration. Okay, so you can see that video and come back, you will understand better. Fine. So electronic configuration of Mg is atomic number 12, isn't it? So electronic configuration 1s2, 2s2, 2p6 and 3s2. So last shell is what? Third shell. So in this shell, how many electrons are there? 2 electrons, isn't it? So 2 dots you should indicate. So this is the dot structure of Mg. Similarly, what is the dot structure of chlorine? Dot structure of chlorine. How do you show? Chlorine, symbol Cl. What is its electronic configuration? Atomic number 17. Electronic configuration 1s2, 2s2, 2p6, 3s2, isn't it? 3s2, 3p5. Okay. Last shell is which one? Third shell. How many electrons are there? You should combine 5 plus 2. Altogether 7 valence electrons are there. Okay, so 7 dots you have to put. Whenever you are putting a dots, you know, 2 electrons together you mention as one pair. Put the dots in the form of pair. 7, no. So this is one pair. That means 2 electrons. This is 3rd and 4th electron, 5th and 6th electron, and this is 7th electrons. So you have to put the dots like this. It's not like however you want. Okay. Show the electrons in the form of pairs if possible. That is important. So this is how we write the dot structures. And after that, you have to show it in a step. Say they asked you a question, show the formation of NaCl by transfer of electrons. This is how they ask a question. So what you have to show, step number 1. Okay, who is a metal here? Sodium is a metal, Cl is a non-metal. Always metal loses electrons. Okay, so sodium is there. What is its electronic configuration? Atomic number 11. Electronic configuration 1s2, 2s2, 2p6, 3s1. Okay, if you are feeling difficult to write in this way, you can write it in a normal usual way that you have learned, like 2, 8, 1. Okay, in a simple way also you can write. And this sodium always loses, how many electrons it will lose? 1 electron it will lose, and after losing that 1 electron it will become Na+. Okay, we call it as sodium cation. Okay, after losing 1 electron it will become Na+. Why it will lose 1 electron? Because if it loses that 1 electron, it gains electronic, what is this guy's electronic configuration? 2, 8. Okay, so 2, 8 is the stable electronic configuration which is shown by its nearest noble gas, that is neon. Okay, so whenever an element is acquiring that stable electronic configuration, it is said to be having stability. Yes or no? So that is the reason sodium loses an electron. How many electron? 1 electron. After losing, it will become Na+. Okay. Similarly, in the step 2, this is our step number 1. In step 2, which is a non-metal Cl. Non-metal always gains electrons. Okay. So Cl is there. What is its electronic configuration? Here we have already written. We will write it in a simple way. It is 2, 8, 7. Yes or no? So it will gain 1 electron. Whatever sodium has lost, no, that electron is gained by chlorine and it will become Cl minus. Okay, this is called chloride anion. Okay, and later in step number 3, you should show the formation. See, Na is there. What is the dot structure of Na? See, Na has in the last shell only 1 electron, no? Show only 1 dot. And what is the dot structure of Cl? Cl's dot structure is here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 electrons. Okay, show the dot structures, both of them. And who is losing an electron? Sodium. That is, this electron is lost to whom? To chlorine. Okay, so this is how you have to show the arrow mark. And this is how, you know, NaCl is formed. And now that Na is there as Na plus and Cl is there as Cl minus. Okay, this is losing. After losing, it is no more a Na. It is become Na plus. And after gaining an electron, this is no more a Cl. It has become Cl minus. Okay, so this is how you have to show the formation of ionic compound in a stepwise pattern. They can ask you NaCl or Na2O, MgO, MgCl2, all these they can ask you. This is the main thing that you have to remember, how to do a formation steps. Clear? Always show a metal losing electron, non-metal gaining electron, ions are formed. So both ions will combine to get a ionic compound. Let us talk about some properties of ionic compounds. There are 3 important properties that you have to remember along with the reasons. Okay. First property, ionic compounds are hard with high melting point. It is because of the presence of strong force of attraction and that attraction has a particular name. The name is electrostatic force of attraction. Okay, so between a positive and negative ions, there is a force of attraction which we call it with the term electrostatic force of attraction. Because of this, ionic compounds are generally very hard and you require very high temperature to melt them or boil them. That's the reason I said they have high melting point. So they may ask the question, ionic compounds have high melting point, give reason. So what is the reason here? It is because they have a strong force of attraction between positive part and negative part of compound. Next one, ionic compounds conduct electricity in molten or aqueous state. Molten in the sense what? Liquid. NaCl, without adding water, when you heat it, it becomes a liquid, no? That is called molten state. And when you add water, it will become liquid. That is called aqueous state. Okay, so only in a liquid form, ionic compounds can conduct electricity. It is because of the presence of ions. Okay, in the liquid state, they produce ions. That is the reason to conduct electricity. Whereas in the solid form, you will not have ions getting separated. You will not have movable ions, because in a solid form, what you will observe, between the ions you have strong attraction. So these ions will not move in a solid form. When the ions are not moving, definitely they will not conduct electricity from one place to another place. Yes or no? So that is the reason solid form of ionic compound do not conduct electricity, whereas liquid form of ionic compound can conduct electricity. Because in the liquid form you have ions, in the solid form ions are there but they are not separately present. They are not moving. And the last and important point is ionic compounds are soluble in water. They are not soluble in kerosene. They are soluble in water. Clear? So these are some important properties of ionic compound that you should remember along with the reason. Fine. And this is with one half of the chapter. And now we will go to the another aspect called occurrence of metals. Occurrence of metals. That means which metal is present under earth crust in what form and how you can extract. And it is a separate branch called metallurgy. Okay, metallurgy is a branch of science that deals with extraction of metal, that is taking metal from ore. So here you must know certain meanings like mineral. What do you mean by a mineral? What do you mean by a ore? And what do you mean by a ganj? Okay, so what is a mineral? The element or the compound present under earth crust is called mineral. Okay, and ore is nothing but mineral only, but from that mineral you can extract metal in a profitable way. That means easily, conveniently, if you can extract from one particular mineral, if you extract a metal from one particular mineral, then it is called as a ore. You should clearly understand the difference between mineral and ore. And what I can say is, all ores are minerals, but all minerals are not ores. This is a very important sentence that you have to remember. Ores are also minerals only, but it is such a mineral from which you can easily, conveniently, profitably extract a metal. Such a mineral we are calling it as ores. Okay, so all the elements which are present can be available in the form of ores or minerals under earth crust. We should dig them, then you should purify, conduct so many chemical reactions, and then you get a pure metal. And such a process only we will call metallurgy, metallurgical process. And now what do you mean by ganj? Ganj is nothing but muddy or sandy particles. Muddy or sandy particles that are present with ore is called ganj. So whenever you dig rocks from earth crust, First and foremost, you will have certain kind of mud particles and sand particles in it. So those impurities are called Ganj particles. So the moment you remove ore from earth crust, first thing is you will make them into small pieces, and later you will start removing the mud and sand particles in it. So such a process we will call it as concentration of ore. So this is the first step in the extraction of metal from a ore, concentration of ore. Okay, so in the concentration of ore step, we remove the ganj particles. Ganj in the sense muddy or sandy particles. Fine. And you know, different types of metals can be extracted in a different way. All elements are not extracted in a same way, you know, from their ores. We have a method. We have a flow chart for that, and you can refer a textbook for the flow chart. Or in one of my video, I have explained very nicely about a flow chart, and you can just go to the link that is popping up above. Clear? Fine. And as I told you, different metals can be extracted in a different way. In the reactivity series, we all very well know about a reactivity series, isn't it? Say potassium, sodium, magnesium, aluminium, only few elements I'm mentioning here, Fe, zinc, copper, Ag, Au. So the elements which are present in the topmost position are said to be more reactive, and these guys are extracted in a different way. These metals are the metals with high reactivity. Okay, you should know the examples of metals which are coming under high reactive category, moderate reactive category, and low reactive category. Okay, so that's why I am telling this. So the elements which are coming in the middle of the reactivity series are said to be having moderate reactivity. Moderate reactivity. And the metals which are placed in the last of the reactivity series are said to be having low reactivity. You know, they have low reactivity. So here, high reactive elements extracted in a different way, moderate reactivity elements can be extracted in a different way, and we use a different process to extract the metals with low reactivity. So what is important here is those methods I am going to tell you now along with the examples. They are important. Also, you must know which elements come under high reactivity, which come under moderate reactivity, and which come under low reactivity. Clear? Fine. So let us see the elements with low reactivity extraction. Okay, and here we have selected mercury to show the example. Mercury is available as HGS in our nature. Okay, so this is called cinnabar. Ore of mercury is called cinnabar. So normally this sulfide form, mercury is there in the form of sulfide ore. It's a sulfide ore. Okay, we have different types of ores actually. Sulfide ores, oxide ores, carbonate ores. So if a ore is having sulfur, it is called sulfide ore. If a ore has oxygen, oxide ore. If a ore has CO3, it's a carbonate ore. So mercury ore is sulfide form. And this sulfide form, we will convert it into oxide form by heating. Okay, in presence of large amount of oxygen. Such a process we will call it as roasting. You can observe the definition here. Conversion of sulfide form into oxide form by heating in presence of excess oxygen. And now one question can be asked. Why you have to convert sulfide form into oxide form? Because removal of sulfur is more difficult than removal of oxygen. Removing oxygen is much easier compared to the removal of sulfur. Okay, so that's the reason always any other form maybe it has to be converted into oxide form. So here with the help of roasting process, that is heating in presence of large oxygen, excess oxygen, we have converted sulfide form into oxide form. This is the first step. Okay, so in the next step what we will do is HGO, we will just heat it, that oxygen part will go away and you will get pure Hg. This is how Hg can be extracted. Okay, so this is one example that you have to remember. Another example is copper. Copper is available as copper sulfide. So what you will do it in a first step is, again you are heating it in presence of excess oxygen. So you are getting Cu2O, copper oxide plus sulfur dioxide you are getting. And later in the next step, Cu2O, whatever is formed, it will react with Cu2S only. Unreacted Cu2S would be there in a system. So these two guys would react and you will get copper plus sulfur dioxide. This is what we call auto reduction. This step is called auto reduction. Reduction in the sense removal of oxygen. So oxygen is getting removed with the help of Cu2S only. We are not using any other agent here. So it is auto reduction. So this is extraction of mercury, this is extraction of copper. These are the two examples that you have to remember under extraction of elements under low reactivity. And now let us go for extraction of elements with moderate reactivity. Here we are taking the help of zinc. Okay, so zinc is available as sulfide form. This is called zinc blend. Some special names you have to remember here. Like here we call this as cinnabar and ZNS is called zinc blend. So what we have to do it in a first step, I told you whatever may be the form, it should be there in the form of oxide, right? So here also on heating in presence of excess oxygen, we are converting ZNS into ZNO. And what is the byproduct we will get? Sulfur dioxide. And sometimes, zinc is available as zinc carbonate also. This is another type of ore for zinc. If it is a carbonate ore, what you will do? Carbonate ore also it should be converted into oxide form only. Okay. Here you are heating in the absence of oxygen. When you heat in the absence of oxygen, you will get zinc oxide plus carbon dioxide gas. And this step we will call it as calcination. Okay, this step is an example for roasting and this step is an example for calcination. So calcination means what? Conversion of carbonate ore into oxide form by heating in the absence of air. Okay, roasting is by heating in the presence of air or oxygen. Here sulfide form is converted into oxide, here carbonate form is converted into oxide. Okay, so any of the process we can use and convert the ore into oxide form. And later your ZNO is there and here carbon is used as a reducing agent. You will get zinc plus carbon monoxide. Okay, and carbon is used as a reducing agent. That means this is the substance that is used for removal of this oxygen from ZNO. Removal of oxygen is called reduction. So the guy is helping for the reduction reaction to happen. So it is called reducing agent. Okay. But here the thing is, instead of carbon, sometimes you can also use aluminium as a reducing agent. And whenever you use aluminium as a reducing agent, such reactions are called aluminothermite process. Such reactions are called aluminothermite process. Say for example, whenever you use aluminium as a reducing agent, it is a matter of displacement reaction only. For example, MnO2 is there. MnO2 is the ore of Mn. Okay, and here it is already there in oxide form. Only the thing is I should remove oxygen. So aluminium can't I use to reduce MnO2? Definitely. Aluminium, since it is more reactive than Mn, this aluminium occupies the place of Mn. So Mn comes in a pure form. Isn't it? So what is the product you will get? Al2O3 plus Mn. Right? Mn you have got it in a pure form. Just a displacement reaction is happening here. Similarly, Fe2O3, when I use aluminium is more reactive than Fe. So aluminium removes Fe freely and it occupies the position of Fe. That is what we mean by displacement reaction, isn't it? So what is the product you will get? Al2O3 plus Fe. And these aluminothermite reactions involve the liberation of large amount of heat. That means they are exothermic reactions. Since they are this particular reaction especially gives a large amount of heat. So this reaction is used for welding railway tracks. Okay, welding railway tracks. Remember, this is a very important question. Aluminothermite process, where it is used for joining the railway parts. Why? Because the reaction produces very high amount of heat, that is exothermic in nature. So this is how we can extract metals with moderate reactivity. Okay, either in the second step carbon can be used as a reducing agent or aluminium can be used as a reducing agent. And now we will see the extraction of metals with high reactivity. Let us see the extraction of metals with high reactivity. So what examples come under metals with high reactivity? Sodium, potassium, yes or no? So usually sodium can be extracted from NaCl solution. And you know, to extract metals with high reactivity, we take the help of electricity here. So the method is called electrolytic reduction. Electrolytic reduction. It is because we are using electricity, and you know what reaction is happening here? Reduction reaction is happening. And let us see how we will do. Whenever we use electricity, we will have a very peculiar setup, like, you know, we will have an electrolytic tank where we will have two metal rods. One rod is connected to a negative terminal of battery. This is a battery. And another rod is connected to a positive terminal of a battery. The one which is connected to positive terminal is called anode. The one which is connected to negative terminal is called cathode. Okay, so cathode is a negative electrode and anode is a positive electrode. And the moment electricity is passed, you know, our NaCl will break up into Na plus ions and Cl minus ions. Okay, and all Na plus ions will move towards cathode because it's a positive part will always move towards negative part. Yes or no? So negative electrode is cathode. So positive ions are moving towards cathode. And Cl minus ions will move to the anode. And once Na plus goes to the cathode, I'm talking about at cathode what is happening. At cathode what is happening is all Na plus ions are going there. No? And you know the rod is connected to the negative terminal. That means electrons, rich rod, electrons always pass from negative terminal onwards. And Na plus, each Na plus will gain one electron and it becomes a neutral Na, and that neutral Na is deposited on the rod. This is how you have separated Na from NaCl. And remember, always gaining of electrons is called reduction. Gain of electrons is called reduction. Reduction has one more meaning. Two meanings, we learned it in the first chapter. Removal of oxygen is reduction. Addition of hydrogen is reduction. In the same way, you have one more definition here in the form of electrons. Gain of electrons is called reduction. Okay, so with the help of electricity, we are doing a reduction reaction. So we are getting sodium separated out from NaCl. So the process is called electrolytic reduction. Okay, so this is how sodium is deposited at cathode rod by reduction reaction. And this is all about extraction of metals with high reactivity. And so we studied extraction of metals with low reactivity, moderate reactivity and high reactivity. And once you extract a metal, you know, the metal will not be 100% pure. There will be some more chemical impurities. Those impurities you have to remove. We will call it as purification technique. In other words, we can also call it as refining. So what do you mean by refining? Purification of metal is called refining. Okay, you are extracting by doing so many processes, but metal will not be 100% pure. To remove the remaining impurities, we perform a method refining. And there are so many methods under refining. Okay, one important method we are learning is electrolytic refining. And that electrolytic refining we are learning for copper, which is there in our syllabus and very important for examination point of view. And this electrolytic refining can also be used to purify elements like lead, aluminium, zinc and silver. This method not only used for copper, it can also be used for these elements also. In our syllabus, we are learning the process by taking copper as an example. And the diagram is very important here. So electrolytic refining, the moment you hear the word electrolytic, it's always with the help of electricity. The moment anything you do with the help of electricity, the same type of setup will be there. And here impure copper rod is taken as anode. This is impure copper rod. From this impure rod, all pure copper we are removing. That is our target. Okay. So impure copper rod one side, pure copper rod one side. This is pure copper rod. Pure copper rod is connected to negative terminal of battery. Impure copper rod is connected to positive terminal of battery. Okay. And the one which is connected to a negative terminal is also called as what? Anode. The one which is connected to a positive terminal is called, this is cathode. And one which is connected to positive terminal is called anode. Okay. And in the examination, they will ask you which one is taken as anode. Which one? Impure copper rod is taken as anode. And which rod is taken as cathode? Pure copper rod is taken as cathode. Okay. And both the rods, we will dip it in electrolytic solution. We will dip it in copper sulfate solution. Okay, fine. And the moment you pass electricity, what will happen is, from the rod, copper atom, this rod, some pure copper atoms would be there now. Impurities are there, okay. But pure copper atoms would be there now. Those pure copper atoms will come into a solution in the form of Cu plus 2. Okay. That pure copper, it will lose electrons actually, and it will come to a solution in the form of Cu plus 2. And these Cu plus 2s, where it will go? It will go to cathode, and on this cathode the pure copper is getting deposited, which is coming from anode. Okay, process is very simple, guys. Whatever pure copper atoms are there, first they will come to a solution. Okay, from the solution it is moving to the cathode. Okay, so this is how all the pure copper we are removing from this anode side, and we are, the copper is getting deposited at cathode side. So slowly the anode rod's size decreases and slowly the cathode rod's size increases, because more and more copper coming from this guy and it is getting deposited on this, no? So size of this anode always decreases, size of this cathode always increases. Okay, remember this point. And one more thing is, whatever, some more impurities would be there, no? Some impurities which can be soluble in this solution and they will come down and settle. These impurities sometimes can come down and settle, and those impurities are called anode mud. Anode mud. So this is what the whole story about the refining of copper. Question can be asked in any way. The whole concept for 3 marks they may ask you, or they'll ask you to draw the diagram and show anode, or they'll ask you to show cathode, which one is taken as cathode, what is anode mud. Question can be asked in any of the ways. Should be ready to answer whichever the way they ask a question. Clear? Clear with the concept? Fine. And now we will go for the last concept of the chapter, corrosion. Okay, we all know corrosion is nothing but spoilage of metal in presence of air and moisture. So what are the 3 best examples for corrosion? First one is rusting of iron. Rusting of iron. Okay, so whenever iron is exposed to air and moisture, it can react with both oxygen as well as moisture, and it can become that brown color powder, which is nothing but rust. And this is what the chemical formula of rust. This is what we call rust. That brown color powder is this. And one point you have to remember here is, rusting can only takes place when both air and water is there with iron. Only if air is there, no rusting. Only if water is there, no rusting. Both air and water should be there to observe rusting process on iron. And if you want more detailed aspect about this concept, I have clearly explained the experiment that is mentioned in our textbook. You can follow the link that is popping up above. Clear? Fine. And the next example for corrosion is silver. You know, silver, when it is exposed to atmosphere, it will react with sulfur and you will get Ag2S, which is nothing but that black coat that you will observe on silver. And the next example is copper. Copper, when it is exposed to atmosphere, it can react with carbon dioxide and you will get copper carbonate. You know, this copper carbonate itself, we will call it as that green coat appears on copper. These are the three examples for rusting. Okay. And now, how do you prevent rusting? Methods of preventing rusting. Rusting can be prevented by simple processes like oiling or greasing, and these are actually the temporary process. And the second important process is painting, isn't it? And the third one is galvanization, and this is very important, galvanization. So what do you mean by a galvanization? Giving a coating of zinc. Okay, zinc coating, we will give it on iron articles. Since zinc is more reactive than iron, zinc starts reacting with oxygen or water when it is exposed. Okay, so such a process we will call galvanization. And the next one is anodizing. Anodizing is used for aluminium actually. For aluminium articles, we will give a coat of aluminium oxide. Aluminium oxide is very much resistive. You know, it will be protecting aluminium for the further reactions. So for aluminium articles, we will give a coating of Al2O3 so that aluminium is getting protected inside. That is called anodizing. Last but very important process which is used to prevent corrosion is alloy making. So what do you mean by an alloy? We will mix one metal with another metal or non-metal so that the metal's properties are completely changed, and the changed properties are much beneficial for the mankind. We have many types of alloys like bronze, brass, solder alloy, stainless steel. And you know, the different alloys, their composition and their uses also has been clearly explained in one of my video. You can just click the link that is popping up above. Clear? So alloy, definition of alloy is important. Alloy is a homogeneous mixture where one metal is combined with another metal or non-metal. Why do we make alloy? To prevent rusting, not only rusting or corrosion. You know, the metal's properties are getting improved. One famous question that can be asked over the years, that has been asked over the years is, you know, pure alloy, the alloyed iron is much better than the pure iron. What is the reason behind it? Pure iron is actually soft one. You know, you can't mold however you want. You can't make the utensils, iron utensils out of pure iron. When you mix iron with carbon or with any other element, you know, iron becomes hard and you know, its properties are completely changed so that the properties are beneficial to make various utensils that we use it in a day-to-day life. Clear? So like that, alloying is one of the methods that is used to prevent corrosion. And the next one is one of the important alloy we have, that is amalgam. So what do you mean by amalgam? Amalgam is one of the alloy where mercury is the element. Mercury is the main element. Along with the mercury, we can mix silver, then it becomes silver amalgam. Along with mercury, if you mix sodium, then it becomes sodium amalgam. So amalgam is an alloy where mercury is one of the element. Along with mercury, any element can be present. So if mercury is there in an alloy, then definitely it is called amalgam, and that mercury must be present in a larger quantity. Mercury should be in a large quantity, element should be there in a small quantity, then we will call it as amalgam. Okay, so this is all about the chapter metals and non-metals, and here the important diagrams for board point of view is the electrolytic refining of copper, and another one is action of steam on metals. Okay, so these are the two diagrams that can be asked for the board examination. Concentrate every activity and every experiment that is mentioned on a textbook, read line to line and understand the concept, and from the experiments and activities only the usually application based questions can be asked. So revise the chapter well, and if you like our concept, please like our video, share it and subscribe for more updates to learn it in an easier way. Thank you all.